Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, April 6, 2021, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. And joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hey, that's me.
It's you!
Yep.
We are in April now. We're officially in the fourth month of the year here at That Nerdy Site. It is very exciting times. And speaking of April, sports are coming alive out here in America.
Yeah, baseball. We are in
the nation's
in
pastime
full
here.
swing
Yeah,
of baseball season,
yeah. So
which completely snuck up on me this year. Like I'm so used to, and obviously
spring training.
It was the same thing last year, but yeah, living here in Phoenix, I'm so used to like my commute or something being disrupted by all of the spring training traffic. Like when I go to Portillo's, I'm so used to knowing exactly when spring training is going on because all of the Cubs fans are there at Portillo's wearing their jerseys and stuff and getting there and eating there before a game or something like that. So like when people start like tweeting about like opening day this week, I was like, oh shit, like, yep, baseball is a thing that's happening again.
We are back in it. And so what better time to talk MLB The Show news than right here in opening week of the season. Trevor, Xbox had some big, I think, news on this front. What did Xbox have to say about MLB The Show?
Yeah, so obviously we knew from reports last year that the PlayStation exclusivity of the show was expiring and basically that Sony Santa Monica would be continuing to make the game, but they would be making it multi-platform. But I don't think any of us anticipated the news that Jamie Leece, who is the MLB Senior Vice President of Games and VR, broke on April 2nd last week, saying that MLB The Show 21 is coming day and date to Xbox Game Pass. Like obviously we knew it was going to be on Xbox, but yeah, like the fact that it is going to be on Game Pass, like starting at launch, it, I think took a lot of us by surprise. Took everybody by surprise. I joked like about how crazy it would have been if they had tweeted out that news on April 1st and then just came back the next day and said, no, actually we were serious. Like that wasn't an April Fool's joke. Like it's coming day and date.
It's for real.
Because obviously this is a series that has been so synonymous with PlayStation for its entirety really. And so for them to not only branch out this year to other platforms, but for like one of those platforms to get it as part of the like regular subscription at launch, I think is it's definitely like Microsoft swinging their wallet around, as we've seen with other things like Outriders, of course, just launched day and date on Game Pass, and so yeah, it's one of those things. Like everybody was, I think, kind of like thrown by this. Obviously, we've seen kind of in the aftermath in the days since that this was clearly not a Sony decision to do that. It was very much the MLB,
I would say,
basically, because they are the license holder and they are the publisher of the game on the non-Sony platforms. They basically like worked out a deal with Microsoft, and Microsoft probably paid them a butt ton of money to say hey, like we really want to bring this to our players, our player base for the first time, and we want to give them this experience as part of Game Pass. So like let's make that happen. And the MLB, obviously hot off the heels of probably their lowest performing season in quite some time in terms of like fiscal gross, were, I'm sure, very eager to take some much needed funding from Microsoft, who flush with cash from the last year. So yeah, I think it's a very fascinating experience, but it's also one like I don't think this is going to lead to like, oh, suddenly other Sony games are going to be showing up in Game Pass or anything like that. No. Like, which is what some people were like proposing. I was like, no, I don't think what's going on here at all.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. We can put that to bed right there and move on to the next topic. But I think it's still pretty incredible. I mean, those of us who have played the show for years now have kind of long said that it is low-key one of, if not the best sports franchises. It is such an incredible series that for so long has been kind of walled off from the larger video game community. And so I actually am one who welcomed the news, and it would be kind of coming to, multi-platforms. But I never would have envisioned this. This is such a good get for Microsoft, right? Like, I think it was Greg who had the tweet of like, this is such a big like get for Microsoft, and it's such a huge like swing and a miss for Sony. Like, it's
a win for Game Pass and an incredible loss for PlayStation Plus.
And like it's such like everything about the show in the last 6-7 months, whatever it's been since they kind of announced that they're coming to Xbox as well. I think it's just been a series of like, ooh, Sony could have done this better probably. And this to me is like the cherry on top of that whole thing of like this just not being rolled out well. But I mean, for Microsoft's case, I mean, they're getting, the baseball franchise is the only one that matters. And one of the premier sporting franchises in games, boom, instantaneously, day one on their big thing that they're pushing almost more than anything else in Game Pass. And like this is a thing that like actually would get people to get like Game Pass if they didn't have it, right? Like this is a franchise that like, again, sort of like Madden or FIFA, like this is one of those sports franchises that like people play this and like 2 of the games in a year.
I'm sure there were a ton of pre-orders that were getting canceled because prior to like this announcement, the game was being sold as an Xbox game. So I'm sure a ton of people who are even already buying it on Xbox canceled their pre-orders because they were like, oh, I can play this on, like I have Game Pass. I don't need to pay the extra $60-$70 for the game. Great.
Yeah. It is such a big get for them, right? And like to me it feeds into this discussion we've had a little bit where, I think that only site and News You Care About in particular, we've talked about how, each one of the 3 console makers is kind of carving out their own area within games that is distinct from the other one. But we've also talked a lot about how Microsoft is making a lot of good moves, right? They're doing a lot of smart things. And I think while Microsoft is still not trying, or arguably even not necessarily able to compete with Sony in terms of selling consoles, they're doing a lot of really small but big to their like particular community things that can add up, right? Like, I think this is the most Microsoft has appealed to me in the last like year or so than at any time in its 20-year history. Like they're just making so many decisions. I'm like, that is really smart. And like I wouldn't hate if PlayStation also did this thing, right? And I think this is another instance where like it just feeds into this narrative. Like Microsoft is just doing a lot of really good things and they're on a roll. Will that translate into them cracking 50 million consoles sold for the console? I don't know. But certainly I think in terms of like consumer kind of reaction and reception towards these console makers, I think the pendulum hasn't shifted by any means, like just swung all the way like it did during like the 360 PS3 era, but it's definitely like moving in Microsoft's direction more than at any point in time during the last generation at all. And so if you're kind of betting on one to just continue to kind of, I think, make smart decisions, it wouldn't be a bad bet to look at Microsoft and be like, that's probably the one.
Yeah, it's fascinating because obviously, like, I feel like everybody in the space has been talking the same thing for Microsoft for years. Like, Microsoft is doing everything right. They're making all these great consumer-focused decisions. So at the end of the day, why is it that they're still in the mind share of everybody losing the quote unquote console war? And like it. Obviously, we've seen in the last generation that, hey, it turns out that like games really is what like a lot of people put their stock behind, and like the damage was done so much at the beginning of the end of the Don Matrick era, at the beginning of the Xbox One era, where like Xbox just stopped being synonymous with games, and they've had to spend the last 7 years basically rebuilding that,
cleaning up that mess.
But like, yeah, I mean. Obviously, like we talked about this a couple weeks ago on the show, so I think it was the week you weren't on, but like we had talked at that point about the PlayStation like closing down the PS3 and the Vita and the PSP stores and stuff like that, and that's obviously come to actual like formal announcement and stuff. But like that as a complete opposite to Xbox backwards compatibility and Xbox like continuing to stand by old games and all that stuff. Like Xbox is doing everything right, but it's still not enough because the thing that people are looking for is like those high quality games to play. And if PlayStation is coming out with a whole bunch of those that you can only play on PlayStation, people will go ahead and just pick up those third-party games on PlayStation 2. I mean, like I'm probably, I don't know if I'm like an anomaly on this, but like I've definitely picked up games that I could have just played on Game Pass on PlayStation, even though I have both systems. I like in part, maybe it's in part because I'm so bought into the trophies or whatever and that ecosystem. But also I just like I prefer playing on my PlayStation and staying on there. So if I don't have to swap things over and play on Xbox, I'm just not as inclined to. But yeah, it's fascinating to just have heard kind of the same thing year in year out of like Xbox doing everything right. Phil Spencer's doing everything right. It's Phil's 7th anniversary was I think this last week, as kind of the head of Xbox, and like he has absolutely turned the ship around on that. And this is another great example of that. But it's still like you saying this is the most you've been interested in Xbox's history of like becoming an Xbox person. Like so even with everything going on, it still hasn't like hit the tipping point for you to like sign up and join like the Xbox ecosystem. So like what other things need to happen to get those people to buy into Xbox is the thing that like I'm just most curious about at this point, because this is like obviously as the non-sports person or anything like that on that nerdy side in any kind of capacity, this was never a game I was going to be inclined to play on Xbox or PlayStation. But I fully understand and know the ecosystem well enough to know that the people who love the show stand by the show and will argue that it is up there, like it is better than your Maddens and your FIFAs even, for what it's trying to do. But I remember having a conversation with Kyle Stevenson, friend of the show over at 6-1 Indie, because he always laments that like the show never makes it into like sports game of the year at Game Awards and stuff like that, and it is like your racing whatever the racing game is, whatever the Nintendo sports game that came out that year, and then like your FIFA and your Madden and NBA 2K or something like that, and baseball just never gets the pick. And I basically had to like say, well, baseball is pretty much America only for the most part. Obviously there are a few other countries that like get really into baseball, but it is such, like you said, America's pastime. It is so tied to us that if you can't get into those other ecosystems, which FIFA obviously has a much better kind of track record, but even like football and basketball are much more, I think American football and basketball are much more viewed by other cultures and other countries compared to our baseball seasons. So like it's already kind of having that uphill climb of like becoming one of the actual big popular sports. And so I think that hurts it, especially in awards centric conversations that aren't just basically US centric. So when you have, half of the judges for the Game Awards are, foreign media sites and stuff like that, how many of them actually bothered playing the show because they follow anything baseball wise. So I think like it just that coupled with the fact that it's been only on PlayStation forever, is like why you have such a small audience for that system. So hopefully it going out to the Xbox ecosystem and day and date on Game Pass will absolutely give it a new kick in the pants for an audience. But I'm still curious, like, really, if, like, I would love to be a fly on the wall to see what actual kind of data they get from this in terms of like player base and any sales that like come just because people want to play the show, with everything else that you can get in Game Pass.
It's definitely one for me where, to go back to the original, like to go back to another point you made, I think it is so much games, right? And I think it it really is incredible how early an entire like impression of this console can be baked in, right? Whether it's like the PS3, $600, get a second job, and that lingering for an entire generation, and it taking like that entire console generation to like kind of pivot what the PS3 is and what PlayStation is, to like the early huge mistakes, and to be fair, Sony's really good decisions at the beginning of the past generation that they're still kind of trying to pivot away from. I think that was so baked in. Like, I think it was so baked in that, like, Microsoft doesn't care about games, right? And, like, it didn't help the fact that, like, in the PS3 generation, that was kind of how Sony came back. Is that, like, they were just like, games, exclusives, and they ran that through PS3. That became their thing, and they doubled down on it at the beginning of the PS4 generation, and Microsoft did weird stuff. And so we are at this point now where like the new console generation has obviously started now, and so I really do think so many of what defines that console is made in the first, like, generously maybe like 15 months to 2 years, right? And like 2 years maybe even pushing it. And so
I mean, like, even so we're like what, 6 months into the new generation now, and I would I mean, like, both of the systems obviously have an issue because of COVID and everything, where there isn't a ton of new stuff on the systems.
Yeah.
But the fact that Sony had Miles Morales and Demon's Souls and Sackboy at launch, and on the Xbox,
even the buzz around like Astro's Bot, like,
and
genuinely,
the Xbox half of the conversation was, sorry, our flagship title has been delayed out of this year, and we still don't have, you know, a new firm window for Halo Infinite. Like, I remember like saying basically at the beginning of January or something, like, I don't know what the next like big Xbox first party game is supposed to be, and that's devastating to like see. Like, obviously, like, both systems are having to rely a lot on third party support, but the fact that like we still know, like, okay, Ratchet and Clank is coming, we know Horizon is coming, we know eventually God of War Ragnarok is coming, and all, like, we've seen stuff in very varying degrees for the future of the PlayStation first party games. And like, we can assume that we're going to get a new Gears game at some point. We can, and obviously Halo Infinite, but like, and the response I got back was like, oh, the Medium or whatever. And I was like, well, A, that's not first party, but I get that that's like an Xbox exclusive, so sure, I'll give you that. But like, that's not a system seller, and that's not like what's going to draw people into the new generation of consoles. So like, even like you're saying, you know, generously 15 months to 18 months or whatever for kind of that window. Like, I would say, like, it doesn't hurt, or it doesn't help that like they stumbled out the gate again with a lack of games.
Yeah.
And that might be kind of the nail in the coffin of like why they can do everything right, but still like PlayStation is seemingly running away with it.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say, just because it came to me, and this is like a way bigger conversation for another podcast, but is just thinking about it. It is interesting to me on that point of first party games. Sony is the one console maker out of the big three who seems able to kind of cycle through big franchises, right? Whereas I feel like Nintendo obviously is all about like, it's like legacy franchises from 20 more years ago, really.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really make new franchises in the same way.
And
Xbox,
they continue to like throw new coats of paint on their old franchises.
Yeah.
Like, because ARMS certainly did not like take the world by storm, and even though they keep like, I mean, Splatoon is like probably their most recent big success to the fact that they're coming out with a third game, but I would also argue that probably all of those could have been in the same game, just as like different maps and stuff like that from you know, my limited experiences with Splatoon. Like, they're not drastically changing up the formula each game.
And then Xbox obviously being basically, I mean, the stage being essentially Halo, Gears, Forza, right? and them just kind of rebooting these titles again and again and again instead of building up new franchises, kind of the easy cliche. Whereas Sony, a little bit like Nintendo, has built up these legacy titles, but then also let them go to rest, right? Like whether it's Crash and let it kind of cool off and then now bring it back, or like Jak and Daxter, or really anything with the PS1 or PS2 kind of era. And then also kind of constantly bringing in new ones too, whether it is Horizon, whether it is Uncharted, Last of Us. I mean, really just Naughty Dog's arc is kind of PlayStation's arc in a lot of ways. And so they're constantly able to kind of keep building out like this history of this franchise, of this console, also bringing in new blood as well. And Xbox has seemed to never really do that. And they had an entire generation to do that in the last one, and they just kept reinventing the old ones. And so I also wonder if it's part of it is just that, right? Like if you are someone who wants to get into Xbox, who wants to check it out, but you don't like Halo and you don't like Gears and you don't like Forza, what is a big franchise to draw you into, right? It becomes a lot harder suddenly, I think. And so that's like the last thing I want to say. Again, that's a way bigger conversation. It's another whole other topic. We're not going to get too into that, but like that is one that I maybe want to get back to on a later episode, because it is something that's really interesting to me, and how they rectify that going forward too. Again, they've bought a lot of studios, so there is potential, but I'll be curious about that.
Obviously the Bethesda acquisition gives them a whole nother slate of like, what games to expect now that supplement your Halo and your Gears and stuff. But like it's unfortunate that yes, they had Crackdown, which took almost the entire generation to come out and then just kind of came out like a wet fart. But you had Sea of Thieves, which, while it didn't probably reach like mainstream
the heights they wanted,
levels that they were looking for, like the people that really played that really loved it. Sunset Overdrive remains my favorite Xbox exclusive, and obviously, like, they're not going to get another one of those because Insomniac is now a Sony studio. But like, they had the potential, and like Fable is going to be another big one when that series comes back. But yeah, like when you have those kinds of conversations, and then on the flip side, you have Sony basically saying like, hey, yeah, we can let Infamous kind of rest now, and Sucker Punch can come up with Ghost of Tsushima as like a brand new potential franchise from the studio, Resistance or was it Resistance? Yeah, Guerrilla going from Resistance into Horizon. Like they're not being shoehorned by Sony to say like, no, just keep cranking out what you guys have been doing for us, in the way that like, maybe there are people at 343 that would love to not work on a Halo game, but what are they going to do? Their studio is literally named after a character in Halo. So and same with kind of the Coalition for Gears. So like it's a drastically different kind of approach to their first party development in that regard. I think we just underestimate how like long it took Phil to like right the ship kind of behind the scenes on a lot of those things, because of like organizational and system decisions that were made for the Xbox One that were really hard to right the ship on. Like the original Crackdown 3 was supposed to be a very different game, but they had to kind of like, when they removed like always online DRM stuff and the cloud computing that they wanted to use for like building out some of the mechanics of that game, when there was such a backlash to that, they basically had to completely rework and rethink that game from the ground up. So yeah, it's a very fascinating, just again, like the different approaches that all the different companies are making. Like I'm very glad and blessed that I can kind of dip my toe in like all of the different waters there, but it'll be interesting to see really when that tipping point finally breaks, that you see a bunch of people saying like, hey, yeah, Xbox actually has stuff I want to come play, because they're going to come over and be like, oh my god, why isn't PlayStation doing any of these things? Like, they should be doing all of these things that Microsoft's doing, because like it is just a lot more consumer friendly decisions that are happening over there.
And maybe they will. I mean, again, that's the one last thing we kind of do to wrap up this topic is, maybe they will, like Sony, for its many kind of, I think, faults at times, is also, I think, very savvy and very quick to kind of steal or work from other people in kind of a blunt way, but in a really consumer friendly way where like if something works, they're going to try to do it in their own way eventually. And if there's anything Sony, I think, is good at, it is making sure that they stay at or right near the top. There's a reason why their worst selling console sold 80+ million units still.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see what they do in the kind of how they use their first 15, 18 months as well.
Yeah, I'm really curious there, just as kind of my last topic or thing on this topic is bouncing off of that. Like, we talked about kind of the recovery from the Don Matrick era going into Phil's era. I think something we haven't really seen and probably won't see the ramifications of for a while is Sony lost a bunch of their executive talent in the last couple of years. Sean Layden, obviously, people like John Drake and Gio from third party relations no longer being there. Andrew House was another big one that stepped down after years and years at the organization. So I think the fact that we don't have the faces of the PS4 generation at Sony anymore, really, apart from Shuhei and Herman Hulst is I guess they've shifted maybe more to hey, the faces of PlayStation are the development leads, and so it's your Neil Druckmann's, it's your Herman Hulst, it's Cory Barlog, it's those people at the individual studios more so than the Sony execs, but still that is going to have some kind of impact. I don't know, good or bad, but it's definitely going to lead to some kind of seismic shift, I would say, probably in the first few years of this generation.
Yeah, I would imagine. I would agree. But enough on that. We have a second story, and it is everyone's favorite topic in April, E3. The good folks over at Eurogamer had the news that E3 2021 will be a free online-only event. It'll run from June 12th to 15th. It'll be an online-only affair, and it'll be free to watch. I didn't know if there was a worry about that, but that has me thinking for the future.
That was a concern. There was a report that came out, I want to say Video Game Chronicle or somebody, VGC, a couple weeks ago, they kind of broke what has turned into this news, but their sources said that the ESA hadn't ruled out kind of a pay for access
paywall
version, paywall, and even then the ESA kind of responded after that article had published, saying we have no plans of charging for E3, but this is kind of it was one of those we have no plans of charging, but we don't have anything to announce right yet, and so today, as we're recording this, they basically came out and said, hey, we're ready to talk about this now. Here's kind of the first steps of our plan for this year. So it was a concern based on how they've kind of been pitching it, and obviously E3 in person, is a paid event for attendees
very
and stuff like that.
expensive,
So there was definitely concern of are you going to charge the public to access demos and stuff like that like you would if you were in person?
But we got E3 online only again. But in some good news, the show has been backed by the likes of Nintendo, Xbox, Gamecom, Konami, Ubisoft, Take-Two Interactive, Warner Brothers Games, and Koch Media.
Yeah, not happy about that last one.
A regular Murderer's Row and Koch Media coming to E3. So that is a exciting development. Sony has not been confirmed yet, so they're probably going to skip it for a third year. If I had to bet, I would say they're almost certainly going to not be there for a third year in a row.
Same with EA.
But that other lineup is still pretty solid, actually. I think at the very least, this will be a more cohesive E3 than last year. I would hope and assume that because they've had a year to plan for an online-only one now, and they have bigger names than they did last year. I don't know. It's weird. We talk a lot about E3. The video game industry can't seem to get enough of it, and talking about its demise and inevitable collapse. But it's something for me where I like events, right? I like these kind of showcases. I don't whether it's E3 or not. I don't particularly mind, but I like big events. I like get hype moments, I think as Tim Geddes would say. And so, I want a cool E3, right? Like I want a great E3 kind of get hype moments, and myself, you, Cam, and Frank all kind of reacting together and doing a live stream. Like that'd be great to me, and have these kind of iconic moments together. Hopefully that's what we can get this year. Hopefully, at the very least, this summer is less absurd than last summer was, in terms of instead of like one big event, like 24 small events that became impossible to kind of keep track of. And so, yeah, this is the news. E3, it's coming June 12th, 15th, online only. It's got a pretty good guest list so far. Trevor, give me your initial thoughts. Give me your verdicts. Give me your quick fire reacts if you have any. Tell me about E3.
Yeah, so the E3expo.com website themselves are touting that you're going to have live press conferences, presumably from all those the studios kind of aforementioned, and a 4-day long video stream. So that's the thing that worries me, is that what is the 4-day long stream going to look like? Is it, hey, it's the conferences, and then in between conferences there will be developer interviews and stuff like that? Are they doing it because I mean I'm way too old at this point to tune in for the entirety of an IGN show or something like that, where they just have they cycle in different developers every 15 minutes. And it's really the things that catch my eye, I will try and tune in, but a lot of times I just am gonna catch I'll sit down and watch the big conferences, and then anything else it has to kind of reach some sort of threshold to catch my attention afterwards. It has people have to be talking about it and being like, oh my God, did you see this cool thing? It's not part of any of the big showcases, but so-and-so just unveiled their new game or something like that. And it has to kind of either be in my circles or really something that appeals to my tastes. Because there's just so much out there, and it can be so overwhelming. I am appreciative that, hopefully this will mean that it is revolving back around a centralized hey, here are the few days you really need to be paying attention, because there were so many days last year that showed up where 5 minutes beforehand I see people start tweeting about something, and I'm like, wait, there's Ubisoft's doing a thing today? Had no idea. Did not and as somebody that follows the industry as closely as I do, not knowing something like that was happening happened way too much last year. And so I think that was what I hope we kind of revert back from a little bit. At the same time, I think I'll be very interested, because I think a lot of the companies probably saw, hey, we don't really need to be tied to this event, but maybe more eyes, because more eyes are on the industry as a whole around this event, more eyes will get on our thing as a result. I think Microsoft coming back to it, in a Sony not being there, only helps them, as it did a couple years ago when that was the first time that happened, when Sony was basically we're not going to be at E3 this year, because the issue has always been Xbox does their thing in the morning and they get half a day's worth of buzz, and then Sony ends the day and steals whatever thunder Microsoft had. So hopefully the kind of Xbox doing their own thing as part of this, and then Sony presumably doing their thing whenever, will give both companies a little bit more time to shine and a little more breathing room. But until we ultimately see, if Sony or EA are going to do things around this block of time as well as they usually would, it'll be like some of that just may not come to pass, and it's still like it might still be like, oh, Xbox has done their thing, and here's a state of play from Sony announcing or like showing the first gameplay footage of God of War or something like that, and suddenly, oh, nobody cares about Halo Infinite because we're seeing new God of War stuff.
Yeah. My big question actually is not about E3 because, we've been there, done that, talked about it. We still have 2 more months, and we'll talk about a lot more since then. It is the last paragraph of the article going into, obviously, vaccines are going in people's arms, but it's still too soon. What do you think this means for other game shows coming forward? The big one that I think of, because it's an actual thing that we would care about, would be PAX West, for example.
Mm-hmm.
PAX itself had a statement a few weeks ago about how the PAX East is officially canceled. There's still hope and planning for PAX West to be in person, but also like Gamescom, TGX, all the big conferences that may or may not have already happened in the year. What do you think the future looks like for them happening in person in 2021? And as a stipulation to that, like question subheader A, do they even need to be in person this year? Is there a need for them to be in person, or could they just wait till next year as well?
I mean,
those are the 2 questions. Go.
So I think everybody wants them to be in person. Everybody at those companies wants them to be in person because that's where the money is.
Way more money
compared to these digital events
online.
So yeah, I mean, ReedPop had to shutter a whole bunch of stuff and let a lot of people go because they didn't have live events for PAX last year, including like entire websites and stuff got shut down as a result of their loss of funds. So like they obviously want to get people back in and get that money back in the door. I've not kept a close eye on how well vaccinations are happening kind of worldwide. I know that here in the States, obviously, things are going pretty well and pretty ahead of schedule with some estimates now coming down to like the U.S. might have herd immunity by June even because of how quickly the vaccinations
over 3 million vaccinations a day
are getting rolled out. We're here. I'll be getting like my second dose of the vaccine here in like a week and a half.
Love it.
So like that's incredibly exciting, which means by Labor Day weekend for PAX West, like yeah, I could absolutely be comfortable doing that. I don't think it will be nearly as big as it has been in the years past, but I mean, you even have like it came up in our conversation last week. How are movie theaters and stuff going to bounce back from all this stuff? Like Godzilla vs. Kong had the best weekend of any of the like pandemic releases.
Yeah.
So like finally things are en route to getting back to normal. So all that to say, I think it's entirely possible that PAX West will actually happen in person. In terms of what that means for like the exhibitors that show up, like it still might be light on the big boys like your Sonys and your Microsofts and stuff. They still might. I mean, well, PAX West, I mean, you would probably have a Microsoft and a Nintendo presence because they're both headquartered out there in Seattle, around Seattle.
I was gonna say international though, it's gonna be tricky.
But yeah, like international travel, so and like Sony and stuff, and a lot of the third-party publishers probably would be a little less inclined. But you might get a lot of small devs that are like, hey, like it's worth the risk for me to like, especially if they and their teams get inoculated and are feeling comfortable with traveling. As we touched on in the article last week, like one of the things that they really miss is having that player feedback of in-person events like PAXs and stuff like that. So I think that's probably the best case scenario is something like a PAX West happening. I think Gamescom, because of just how massive it is and how it is a like centrally located in Europe kind of thing, I think there will probably be way too many differences internationally across the different European countries and different like response rates and vaccination rates that they're probably still not going to be ready for definitely not ready for the size that Gamescom usually is, but like as a result, I think that'll probably still have to be a digital only thing this year, and then hopefully get back to normal next year. So that would be my kind of like internal, like US based versus external. Like by the time Tokyo Game Show comes around, like that might be better suited. That might be an in-person event for that segment of the audience. But I don't know. I've not kept an eye on how Japan is doing.
It is really interesting, actually. So like everything about this is really interesting just logistically, but with Gamescom in particular, all of the countries except for the UK obviously are part of the EU, and they're all kind of doing the same shit. So like their rules actually are pretty unified on that, which is one thing. Again, for all these circumstances, though, the same logic applies to me, which is that like if you're not from the country, though, and so TG like Tokyo Game Show is one for me where I look at it and I go, they're probably just gonna make it Japan only.
Yeah. I mean, like,
or Korea or like Eastern Asia only kind of thing, right? Like, it's and like PAX West is what, September? Where this summer, like, Biden said by May 1st, everyone who wants one should start being able to schedule one, and like every state should have like allow them access kind of thing. Pretty much everyone who wants one should be able to get a shot by like where the pace we're at right now, over 3 million a day. June, July kind of time frame. But I mean, you can't travel anywhere right now. And these are things that America is actually, for all the mistakes we made in the last year, we're actually at the forefront in terms of vaccinating our people, both in terms of giving them the first shot and in terms of giving them the second shot. We're among the best in the world at that, almost like the presidency matters. And so it's one for me of, we're far ahead of the EU. We're far ahead of Japan. We're far ahead of a lot of like the big other power centers in the video game industry. So I could absolutely see a circumstance where, PAX West might happen in some form or another, like in person, but none of these people are going to be allowed to go. To say nothing of the fact that for all of these events, if they do happen in person, and PAX West in particular, because it's kind of the one most against the gun in terms of happening soonest, I would be stunned if it happens at full capacity.
Oh, yeah. No.
I would be absolutely flabbergasted. I would have to imagine it's going to be like 50% capacity, reduced capacity, like that, something like that. Especially with it being in Seattle, Washington. I had to think about that, which is a like liberal progressive state, right? It's not like it's going to be happening in like Texas or Georgia or Florida. I
was going to say, I did see, and I can't actually speak to the validity of it, but I saw tweets going around yesterday of like, a Texas Rangers game or something, packed stadium because Texas has lifted things. I don't know if it was an old video or something like that, because it very easily could have been one of those like, hey, this, feeds into your personal biases or whatever. But if that was the case, and like, I mean, like Florida has WrestleMania coming up here in a like this weekend basically, and they're bringing in audiences. Obviously, they had the Super Bowl and stuff, so like, there are places that are flaunting, the CDC guidelines and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't think Seattle would be one of them. And I think especially like a lot of the partner organizations would insist on, booth spacing and stuff like that, and like rethinking that. The fact that, like international travel is still going to be a problem, and even like interstate travel might be an issue.
Yeah.
Like I mean, like you mentioning that reminded me immediately of like, hey, yeah, like Disneyland's going to open, but it's going to open only to California residents. And I'm like, well, damn it. Like I have to wait until, it opens up a little more or whatever, and until I can get back out there or something. But yeah, it's like
the complexities of, doing stuff in a COVID world, we're seeing more and more and more. Right. And the Rangers game you talked about, the Texas Sport game you talked about, was really interesting because the thing I saw, so again, these could have been different things or separate things. It could have been different teams in Texas. But the one I saw, it was opened up to like 50% capacity is what it was opened up to. And that, let's say that number was half full, was 20,000 people, just for easy math. The thing I saw said it had like 10,000 people in the stands. Like even like that wasn't filled up because people were still just like, oh, I don't really like, you know what I mean? Like
It's so yeah. I just looked it up, and it's a Sports Center tweet, so I'm guessing it's actually like accurate. But it's from yesterday. A look at Globe Life Field, where the Texas Rangers are currently playing in front of a full capacity crowd of 40,000 plus fans, and it's just like it's packed seats. There's no social distancing, anything like that. There's no like spaces between seats. It is a crowd full of people. So like yeah, it's
yeah, I mean, and so, you know, I think we're in a race against stupidity a lot of the time, and this is another great example, right? Where like I think, you know, when Biden took office, on January 20th, we were averaging about 800,000 shots a day, basically. We're averaging 3 million plus now, right? With constantly getting more and more supply, like deals with like distributors and vaccinating all this stuff, and now making deals to like help vaccinate the rest of the world as well, and get that stockpile supplied. And at the same time, yeah, the governors of Texas and Florida are doing their shenanigans and shit, and it's constantly a situation of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, that can feel like 1 step forward and 2 steps back at times. And so I think that, you know, there is this tension, and there's a very, I think, somewhat legitimate concern about like purely because of just stupidity, not because of any other reason, but just because of like stupidity and selfishness, we would get tipped into like some sort of like minor fourth wave kind of thing, right? While still vaccinating 3 million people a day. And that's the concern, right? Like that's the concern for PAX. That's the concern for Europe and everything else too, is just like people just wanting it to be over for understandable reasons in some of their cases, and then in other cases for purely political and selfish reasons, just wanting things to end, and that leading things just get worse for a little bit too, right? Like long term, I don't necessarily know if anyone argues where we're going to be heading, but short term, it can cause real repercussions, right? And in a pandemic that has obviously cost hundreds of thousands of lives in America and millions across the world, like that matters. And then on the significantly smaller, less important scale of like, can a video game trade show happen? I think you're seeing these kind of constantly conflicting standards with each individual state and the patchwork nature of them. And how that affects the other states around them, obviously, because despite what you want to say, America is one country, right? So if you want to drive from Texas to Georgia to Florida to Louisiana to Washington and back again in a week, you could, and nobody can stop you. It's all just one country, right?
I mean, like, even if you wanted to fly to all of those places, like
yeah,
I could like, book those flights and do it.
Yeah, and so that's the point, and like you have to just be. It is constantly a thing, especially now in the case where you just have to be more concerned about everyone else than just yourself. And that tension mixed with, like, again, the understandable desire to want to do things again after 14 months. Like, a legitimate desire that doesn't make you a bad person to want to do things, but you just have to, I think, put that in perspective of, like, but me not doing things can save people's lives, right? And so, yeah, I mean, like, I don't know about PAX West. I would still say we'll see.
Yeah,
it depends. I think a lot depends on April and how April goes. And if we do just kind of, if cases do rise more, I think that can lead to kind of a effect, especially with, like, the variants in there. So April, to me, is going to be huge. Because by the end of April, we'll have vaccinated, like, 40+% of the country will have just gotten one shot. Like, we'll have gotten such a big chunk that, like, it'll become less important.
Yeah.
But if we can just get through April is the thing for me.
I think, I mean, just as we kind of continue on in the conversation, I think one of the things that, like, the worst case scenario for ReedPop and PAX would be they're the first ones to do it and an outbreak happens and it's just a PR nightmare and PAX is never safe again. And that's, you know, like the fact that they already have to combat the PAX plague, like already, like it's already known as kind of a hub. So unless they come out and say like this is how adamant we're being about, you know, social distancing. You still have, like, if you're coming to these events, you have to wear a mask, and it, like, even if, you know, like, if they had a like we need to see proof of vaccination.
Proof of vaccination.
Like,
yeah, I was gonna say
they would have to do those kinds of things to potentially curb the concerns and the issues, because it might ultimately come down to them just saying, you know what, we don't want to be the first ones out the gate because of just how badly that could go wrong, and that they might not be able to recover from it. Like, they already dodged a bullet with PAX East being like the last thing that happened, and fortunately no major outbreaks from that show.
In some ways, I think PAX is really lucky too, because unlike Tokyo Game Show or Gamescom or E3, they have multiple events in a year, right? So like if PAX were to say we're gonna do PAX West online only, they could then say, and PAX Australia is still gonna happen in a country where they have like no active cases basically, and it'd be like significantly safer for them to do as a test case. Be like, it's one of our smaller events. It's an easy way to just like test case this in, get everything kind of set up on that, and then 3 months down the line for PAX East 2022, then we kind of start going again, right? Like PAX Australia, I think usually happens like January sometime in that, and so it's like that to me is one where they can be like, cool, like we'll test case out, check it out. It's happening in a country where like nothing is like, you know what I mean? So they have the option to postpone it and not have to wait an entire year, but wait 3 months for the next PAX event, right? And so that's also an option.
So PAX Australia is currently dated on their site for October 8th through 10th of 2021. And then
earlier this year,
Philadelphia is PAX Unplugged, which is another like much smaller scale show for them, because that's basically the tabletop only kind of stuff. Those certainly could be, like potentially
test cases, right?
Decent test cases.
Especially Australia. I mean, even Australia, October, right? Like that's so far from now, in a country that already kind of has it. I mean, it helps that Australia is a nation that has long had incredibly strict quarantine procedures, because it's an island nation with a lot of like indigenous species that aren't anywhere else, so they take it very seriously. Like you can't, like, again, this is why Johnny Depp got a bunch of shit for having dogs there. They take it very seriously before a global pandemic, and so like that'd be one of the cases I would look at and be like, that's probably a spot to try it out. But we've gotten very far from the original topic. Trevor, do you have any other final thoughts on E3 or any of the things we've covered since then?
No, I mean, I think it's a good conversation to like spin off of like, what does this mean for other shows? And obviously E3 being, the big show of the year that all eyes look towards, being digital only still, I think sets a tone for, hey, 2021 just might still be another digital only year. And especially
this far out too,
if Gamescom kind of follows it up with that and says like, hey, we're going to stay digital only too. It sets enough of a precedent for all the other places. Like, I mean, it being announced two months out here for E3. Like, I mean, it seems like we've kind of been murmuring about this for a while now, so like it actually seems a little late in the game, but the fact that they've got the support by enough of the studios that they've got support from is probably what they were waiting for, and like they wanted buy-in
I would
before
assume
they could like draft that press release. Because like the huge element of this, obviously, without a live consumer show, they need to make money to put this on somehow, and they don't have to necessarily rent the convention center space, so that's a significant cost cut, but like there's probably still going to be a ton of ads and stuff baked into this, or a ton of like sponsorship or activation kinds of deals. Fortnite's going to have all sorts of footage of whatever the season of Fortnite stuff is going on, I'm sure, and stuff like that. So like I imagine we'll see a lot of that, and I'm curious really to see basically how ESA makes money off of this with a completely free event this year versus other years.
Yeah, I agree. But enough of E3. Trevor, you got not one but two shout-outs this week. Take it away.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to shout out is something I saw kind of making the rounds a couple days ago, and then when I dove into it and actually looked at it, it's unsurprisingly, it's another one of those articles from like, hey, this actually came out a couple years ago, but it is called.
Sure.
It is titled "It's Just Impossible. Devs Explain Why Big Online Games Always Seem to Break at Launch" by Austin Wood from Gamesradar. Like I said, it's from like a 2019 article, but I saw it making the rounds in response to all of the Outriders kind of hubbub over the weekend. So definitely check that out because it is a interview with a handful of devs from online teams and kind of the teams behind a lot of those always online kinds of games, saying like, hey, it's not as simple as just buy more servers, because that's
switch,
like honestly, like that's very rarely the issues that they encounter is kind of what they talk about. So it is just a handful of like, hey, here are some of the other things that could be going wrong here and what would have led to this. And then the second shout out is, our friend Andrea Rene. Of course, we mentioned a few weeks ago on the show, was going through some health stuff. There was a wonderful little flurry. A whole bunch of her friends and industry fans got together and basically like did a coordinated like hashtag mob on Twitter today. A bunch of people wearing Andrea Strong shirts that I want to say the team over at Tinsley PR, I think, actually kind of was like behind and spearheaded. But like a ton of people were out there, showing their support of Andrea Rene and John Drake as they're kind of recovering from Andrea's recent bouts with medical issues. And so I wanted to give a shout out to AndreaStrong.net, where you can go and basically find and pick up the shirt for yourself. She tweeted out, like the whole thing was a surprise to her, but she tweeted out after the fact that all proceeds after cost are going to go to charity that she's going to talk about a little bit more on the upcoming What's Good Games anniversary stream in I think next week, I think Monday. So I'm not sure necessarily what the proceeds are going to support, but it's going to support some kind of charity, presumably some kind of medical charity or in support of whatever she was kind of having to deal with. But yeah, so that's a great cause, and again, like shout out to Andrea Rene, and it's good to see her back up and doing stuff. She was back on the What's Good Games podcast this last week, so I'm happy to have her in my ear holes again.
Yes, absolutely. I thought about getting the crop top. Probably won't get it ultimately, but it did look pretty good. But probably just get the regular shirt.
They
have a very good.
Yeah, I've personally made I've got more than enough black screen print tees. So I've kind of I've made the call in recent years to basically not buy any more black screen prints. And so when I went to that site, I was like, oh, thank God they've got a navy blue one. Okay, I'll buy the navy blue. But yeah, that's I've run into that a couple times right now, and I'm wearing my for video viewers, I'm wearing my What's Good Games shirt in honor of Andrea and the What's Good team.
It's interesting because I'm someone who doesn't actually own that much black. I don't like to dress in black that much. I'm someone who very much likes colors. I like vibrant kind of things. And so routinely I have the opposite problem where it's I wish I had more color options than just this.
I like black because it hides the gut.
Sure.
But I'm trying to just say fuck it and be more comfortable with the gut that I have.
Sure. But yes, we absolutely wish Andrea the best. She's, again, not just the busiest lady in the industry, but also one of the very, very best as well. That's a show, though. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have. Their support means the world to us. It helps make shows like this and like that D+ show happen, and keep the lights on over at That Nerdy Site HQ. So go check out that. Again, it's patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Check out all the tiers, all the goals, all the gadgets and wonders and whatnots. And I think we've been on a very, very good roll with Patreon exclusive episodes, for example, and they're just $1, and you get some good conversations. So I would check all of that out. Again, you can also go support us by going to any kind of podcast service around the globe and and subscribing, sharing with your friends.
We're actually on Stitcher now. I finally actually put that through. I'm sure you've said Stitcher a ton in these episodes in the past, and I don't think we've ever actually been available on Stitcher.
now.
But I
It's
went through and
true.
finally like submitted that this last week.
SoundCloud, Stitcher, we did it, guys. We did it. Because of viewer demand. So we're on all those.
No, it
like, subscribe,
was just
share
one of
with
those like,
friends.
I feel like that's a big enough one that I should probably figure out how to make that happen.
Rate and review us on iTunes. It really does help get the word out and spread the gospel. Otherwise, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite, I believe is the URL. Like the videos there. Just watch them. Have them running the screen time. I mean, watch the videos for sure, too. Hit the big subscribe button. I think we're getting close to some sort of milestone marker over there.
I want to say we're near 250 subscribers.
Near 250.
I think we're in the 230s.
Button,
comfortably in the 230s right now.
We can do that. We can hit 250. 250 by the end of the month. That's the goal. Here we go.
That seems doable.
And then go watch out the videos. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor Starkey at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to plug?
I will plug our It Takes Two Let's Plays that Logan and I have been playing on the youtube.com/thatnerdysite. We are, as of this episode going live, we've got parts 1 and 2. Part 3 will be going up tomorrow, a.k.a. Thursday the 8th. So check that out. And yeah, we're just kind of enjoying our time as we continue to progress through that game.
I will also shout out everything happening on the youtube.com/thatnerdysite. All of the podcasts have video versions as well, whether it's D Plus Show, whether it's News to Care About, or whether it's That Nerdy Site Show, or That Conversation Pod, I suppose, too. Any podcast from That Nerdy Site. So go check all of those out. Trevor's done a lot of work in getting that to happen. We're all very proud of the product over there. But also check out the Let's Plays, not just the It Takes Two one, although it is very good, if I have to say so for myself. But also Trevor's playthroughs through the NES Classic, and his Dark Souls playthroughs.
Demon Souls.
As well as Demon Souls. Damn. I knew there's so many Souls. As well as his Hitman ones that are always fun to watch him come up with creative solutions to problems.
The last Hitman one that went up was I did a special one that went live on Easter this last Sunday, because it was like they have like a seasonal event going on for like Easter eggs in the Berlin map, and you have to like everybody's got like rabbit masks on, and for one of the levels of the escalation, it was like, okay, take out these 3 guys, and they're all in like this, outdoor party lounge area that's just full of people. And it's like, okay, I don't know how to do this stealthily, so screw it. I'm just going to make a whole bunch of noise. I'm just going to pick off a whole bunch of people until I can take out my targets. And I joked this is like the clumsiest one of the Let's Plays I've done, but it was still a lot of fun to do and make happen.
I love that. So I might check that out after we get to recording this, because I love something like that. For myself, you can go check out me at Lefty Logie, L-O-G-Y, or Lefty Logie on Twitter. I will second out every one of those video YouTube shoutouts. They're all great. I will also stay tuned for, you get a double dose of written pieces. I delayed my written piece for March this month because I'm going to do 2 or 3 soccer-themed ones for April. It's pretty exciting, actually. I'm a ways into all 3 of them. They're pretty fun. As we kind of wrap up the end of the Premier League season and launch into MLS here in the States. So stay tuned for all of that. And then as well, again, please check out mine and Trevor's It Takes Two Let's Play series. It is a lot of fun to record. We had a blast, and tomorrow's episode that's going to go live is so much fun. It is such a great designed series of levels and platforms. I can't wait to record more of that coming soon to you. And then there are even rumblings out there of more Let's Plays besides that in the works. So just stay tuned for all the good content on youtube.com. Let's get to 250 kids by the end of the month. And for myself, for Trevor, for everyone over here at That Nerdy Site, thank you for listening. Play your games and be good to each other.